Um, so, yeah, we got the same kind of situation here. And here's what I call the material proposition. So this is sort of the way you would summarize the reasons for your indignation if you were asked to and if you were articulate enough. The underground man has very culpably and shockingly rejected Lisa after manipulating her and causing her to trust and care for him, and is a complete jerk. I am very confident of being in a moral position to condemn him, and he deserves to be made to regret vividly and painfully what he has done as repayment for his vile behavior. May he be made to suffer this regret. So, that looks to me like a perception that satisfies that might be a basis for the judgment that the underground man has done something terribly unjust. Now, it's not necessary. This is not a necessary condition for making the judgment that the underground man has done something very unjust. You can imagine, I think, a person with frontal lobe damage, a person who has very little emotional responsiveness, but high IQ. There's a character in Damasio's Descartes' Error like this. He's perfectly intelligent. He passes all the IQ tests and the MMPI and various other kinds of personality inventories, but he doesn't have any emotions. He's quite intelligent, and he can actually do this. He could actually take the story of the underground man, and he could conclude from the story that the underground man did something very unjust to Lisa. So I don't think that the emotion is a necessary condition for a necessary basis for the judgment, but it does have all kinds of epistemic advantages. I think that the person who responds normally to this, or shall we say virtuously, to this scene, understands the injustice better. He has a kind of acquaintance with the nastiness of the underground man and of the plight of Lisa, and he has more justification for his judgment than Damasio's patient would have. I don't think that indignation is the only emotion with which you could make sense of this story. In the first part of the story, the underground man's soul is kind of bared to you, and you find yourself encountering an extremely dysfunctional character, a disaster of a human being. And so you might, I think, have second thoughts about your indignation, which I think would probably be the first thing that would rise to your mind. But you might think, okay, you know, the underground man is such a pathetic case, such a damaged human being, that I don't think he could be held responsible. And so you might take away the culpability aspect. You might say, I'm not so sure about the culpability aspect. And in that case, then your emotion might change from indignation to just sadness, lamenting this injustice that's been done to Lisa, right? You feel bad about it, but you're not angry at anybody. So that I think is another reading. And if there were a dispute between us as to which reading is better, we could have a conversation, right, and maybe sort that out and decide whether the underground man is really damaged enough not to have any culpability. So that, I think, is all I'm going to say. And I would be happy to receive comments.
Something emotional that really has a genuineness about it, but the factivity's missing. So let's just imagine we vary the story in Notes for the Underground so that Lisa has consented to be in a psychological experiment, and the patrons consent as well, though they usually don't read the fine print. But anyway, someone comes in who has read the fine print, and the experimenter sees the same thing that's described in the story, but Lisa is not downcast, and the patron doesn't really mean it. He's acting. So the experimenter feels what she would call indignation. Is it really indignation? How do you handle cases like that?
Yeah,
I feel
that these emotions, that emotions are perceptions in a non-factive sense. So I think that we would want to say when they're not true of their object, then they are misperceptions, but they're still generically perceptions, right? So and furthermore, they would be perceptions of the type that they appear to be. We wouldn't say that the person is not indignant just because he was wrong about the scenario, and actually nobody was being hurt and the underground man was not being vicious and so forth. Is this thing working, or I don't know. Anyway, you can hear me, right? Can you? So sure. I mean, I think it's just ordinary, everyday language about emotions to say, sure, he's indignant, but he's wrongly indignant, right? He shouldn't be indignant, or something like that. He's indignant, and furthermore, if you take my account of what that means, then he's seeing the situation according to the defining proposition for indignation. And so he's seeing it in this particular way. He's perceiving the situation in that particular way. I don't...
And joy that something is going to occur has to be doubly non-literally perception, because if it's going to occur, it hasn't yet been perceived. So this is anticipatory perception. Yeah. And then you could have that emotion when it's not going to occur, as you could have indignation when the thing isn't really wrong, right?
Yes. Yes. Okay, are you...
how broadly you're using the idea of perception.
Yeah. So are you thinking of an emotion like hope that takes a future object?
You could receive information with joy about a future event, so you've got an emotion all right. Okay. It's the right kind, but the event isn't going to occur.
Yes.
And even if it is,
but
you're not perceiving it. You're anticipating it.
Yeah.
So you need a broader notion than the ordinary one of perception to cover all the territory.
Yeah, it is a broader notion. And you know, I've just in the last year or so, started using this language of perception. Maybe, I mean, before that, I talked just about construal. But it seems to me that it's helpful to talk about perception because these are perceptual kinds of experiences, right? And we don't always use the word perception factively. So if I have a dispute with somebody about something, or let's say it was actually a visual experience. Let's say I witnessed an accident at a corner or something. I could, and let's say that the other person who also witnessed it disputed what I said happened. I think it seems to me I could say, well, that was my perception. And there's a non-factive use of the word perception.
Don't you think each of you perceived something, and you perceived it as having one property, the other person another?
Yeah.
So there's factivity as to an object or an event, and non-factivity as to the property attributed. At least that's another way to look at it. So construal again comes
Yeah.
in, and I'm wondering whether your earlier terminology doesn't have some advantage in breadth.
Yeah, it does. It does have exactly that advantage.